Thank you very much for all coming. What we wanted to do in this final session was really just to reflect on some of the lessons learned from the Inspiring Futures project. So from the different perspectives, what it was like to be involved in an embedded participatory research project, what it took to do the project well, what the particular challenges were, how we responded to those. We can think of sort of COVID, obviously, but then impact of personal change, organisational change, how that might play out. And so that's sort of lessons learned, and then moving to the future, thinking about what next. So what should come after the Inspiring Futures programme? And as part of that, how can we think about building on a sustainable evidence base of impact, understanding what it is that contributes to maximising impact in a positive way? What do researchers need to do? What do organisations need to do? What do practitioners need to do? Are there things that we're missing at the moment that we really need to sort of develop? So I shall open the floor, if I might. I don't know who wants to go first, but...
So I think, what was really interesting is that because Inspiring Futures happened at such a tricky time, I was talking to Andy a lot, and I was talking to Anna a lot about setting up the project and everything. And I think we had a really easy ride with a lot of our projects set up compared to a lot of other people. And I think one of the reasons for that was what we were talking about this morning, and it's about relationships, and it's about the relationship between the organisation and the prison you were working in. So I could cite probably any one of the prisons that we worked in, Thorncross, Norwich, and Liverpool you went to as well. And because we have relationships in those prisons, and we have people that care about the work very much in those prisons, it wasn't too difficult. And what Zee was saying earlier about the importance of having a champion in there, and then having that champion think, okay, so it's a project about X, Y, or Z, so I'll go and ask somebody else in the prison, in this case the family team. So what Zee created for us was a whole group of people who enabled the project to happen. We enabled the project outside, everybody kept communicating, and therefore it worked really, really well. And it was the same also, I think, props to Sarah as well, because once Sarah was given the name of the person to go and do the work with, then I think, because she knows how jails work, it made the whole thing so much easier. So I don't think we have a very balanced view in the fact that we were really lucky because of the prisons we worked in, although they weren't the same ones as we thought we were going to be working in. It was still absolutely down to the relationships that we built and that we had, and people who cared enough about the project to want to say yeah. And then Sarah following up, and we didn't even have to worry about that because she would go and do her bit. So I think, just talking about, I think relationships, and don't take them away, because they're the only way this kind of stuff works.
I don't know if it's Chatham House rules here, so I won't share quite. We didn't have quite the same experience, so we did have a really, really difficult time in the prison that we did the project with, and in many ways the similar themes came up, but from the other experience, which was we didn't feel that we didn't get a lot of support, we didn't have a consistent space, we had no kind of, we got picked up by chance in the prison by someone who was committed to it, and it's that chance that made the project a success. And obviously that's not very sustainable for the work, but we were really grateful for it. But it was interesting. So relationships, absolutely. I was just thinking a little bit also flexibility, and I imagine that was a theme that runs through. But I was thinking back to when we started the project, we were going to be in Holloway. Obviously, Holloway closed. We were going to be in Downview. We were going to be in Send. We went back to Downview. It was like even that kind of journey from inception of the project idea, what we wanted to do and what we did, there was massively different. And I think we do that all the time when we're working in prisons, we're just very adept at constantly changing and constantly adapting. And so I just wanted to reflect a bit on that, and also just to say something about something that was particular about Inspiring Futures, which was a model that the Alliance really from the start did was actually fund all the activity. So the research was funded, and obviously you referenced that this morning from the ESRC, but actually the Alliance secured funding from Paul Hamlin Foundation, which enabled all of the organisations to then tender to take part in the project. And actually that's very rare to have that kind of, for the actual delivery of the arts activity to be funded. So it's worth kind of noting that just in terms of what really worked, because it meant that as we were pushing it back year on year, depend on the delays, and the Alliance was managing all of that with the funder, it meant it was the kind of possibility of us taking part and delivering was still there. And the situation for many of us as organisations at that point could have meant that we could no longer take part because it was just too precarious what we were dealing with COVID. So I just wanted to flag that as something about kind of learning from it.
I'm just mindful of you talking about the challenges that there was, particularly for the Alliance, and I know one of the things that you talked about was the change in personnel. But I'm really mindful of the power of the arts, and the arts being really solution focused. And so just hearing about what you were saying, Anna, like the biggest thing, something that we haven't really touched on enough today, I think, is the impact of COVID and what that meant for the research overall, and what that meant for all of the people that were involved, the people that are imprisoned, and the whole change to their regime, to their well-being, what that looked like, the stress levels that there was amongst the staff within the prisons at the time, and in fact all the government bodies that were having to manage all of those things. And I think that the impact of that is still really felt. When I came into position last year to cover maternity leave to manage the National Criminal Justice Arts Alliance, but I'd come from Clean Break, and so I was aware of the project. But one of the things that felt really important to me was creating more life for the work and for people externally to really be able to see the work, which is where the thoughts of the exhibition came from. And what I'm really mindful, and one of the things that that we've heard over and over today, was thoughts about safety. The participants in the room having to feel safe, the practitioners that go in the room bringing that safety. Everybody does their risk assessment when they're going in the rooms, and all of the decision makers, because everything comes down to when you're going into a prison, the thing that's most important is the safety. When the number one is having to make the decision, that's what they're thinking about. When HMPPS are making their decisions, they're thinking about public perception. Bringing that back to people and what it means when people are able to take part in an activity. I was just really mindful of a conversation that I've had in the last couple of weeks with a forum of prison governors. And everybody in that room said that they believed in the power of the arts, but when it came down to the safety of their institutions, they didn't really know how to communicate the narratives around the benefits of the arts versus everything else that they have to do every day. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we face as a sector is really being able to articulate the narratives around this. How do we take all of the research and put that into an actionable strategy so that the wider public, I've heard about the different publics, but actually we're all part of that. We're all part of all of those publics. How do we bring people on board with us, with that work? And so I was delighted to see the 97% of people who said that their minds had changed. And how do we do that more? Because even when I look across this room, in some ways it's like talking to ourselves, because we know this work. We know that, and that's the challenge, I think, for us. That's the challenge is, how do we now leave this room? How do we move that forward? How do we ensure that funders continue to fund this work? How do we ensure that all of those that are within all those different government bodies really come on this journey with us and put the resources in place, because it's one thing putting the manpower in, but I often say, and actually Nola and I were talking over lunch, it's great when you go in a room and you see all of the people that say that they all really understand it, but actually if it's the same type of person, it makes no difference. We need to be able to really look at who are in those rooms, who's doing the work. Is that really does that go, and going back to Andy's work of mirroring, is that mirroring the community that we live in? And how do we continue to have those conversations? How do we continue to make change? Because there's different trends that come year in, year out. It's great to have this research that really looks across art forms, but when we look at our evidence library, we've got 104 different pieces of research there. So yes, we do know that the art works, but how do we get everybody else to know that? And that continues to be our challenge.
When we started this, we wanted to end the conversation around evidence. That was our ambition. Let's provide evidence for once and for all that makes a step change, that we never have to speak to a commissioner again and say, oh yeah, have you ever thought about using the arts? It's quite valuable. We could just, that it was there. So I don't know, I'd be really interested. So I'll kind of come back to you about thinking about whether that's happened. I wanted to just, there is one thing I think, there's lots of learning for our organisations from this research. That's one thing I really want to get under it, because I feel like you've given us a tiny aspect of it, and I'm thinking I'd love to understand if there's any nuance around women, around different demographics, around who we're excluding, who's taking part in the arts in the prisons. Do we know their racial backgrounds? Are we missing groups because of how the arts is perceived, because of who's delivering it? I'd really love to understand that so that we can change our practice. So I think there's massive value in this for us, for the sector. I know we know what we know, but even thinking about endings, when you were talking about endings, and I was starting to question our practice around endings, we're always a bit like, well, we can't do anything. That's not quite our responsibility. We've stepped out. That's for the prison. And it really made me think differently about what can we do and what conversation should we be having about what's next, and especially if the impact is going to be really different if we sustain it or not, depending on how we end. If it's that significant, we need to be considering that better. So I think there's lots for us to learn. And the other thing I was thinking, which I might not be was just a thought, was about our prison population. They're not a group with any power, but this, and many will tell their stories about what the arts means to them. But people might also not know ourselves about what the impact of taking part in a project has. How are we going to share this research with the benefit with the participants whose lives we're exploring most, because they often just get they're part of the story, and part of the influence are all the people who are affected, who can say, God, look, this really affected my well-being, my skill set, my confidence, my safety, and I can go out and now tell that story because I have the tools and the narrative to do that. And I don't think we think of them having the social capital or being that resource, and I think we know that they are, because when we hear people like Lee talking about the impact, you only need one person to say that to feel changed. So there's a question for me about what that resource of people who have benefited and participated is, if that makes any sense.
I mean, I feel like I could respond to everything that you said as well as the original question. So, but I'm anxious to get to the floor. But so a few things that have come up, I think, from a research perspective. So, Sarah, you talked about kind of communication and relationships, and we've certainly found that to be really central. I would present a sort of a challenge to the notion of having a champion within the prison, which we have found to be absolutely essential. Is there a way that can be paired with the systems in place in the prison, such that if the champion in the prison moves prison, they leave in place a culture that is supportive and continues to operate, but also takes that to whichever new prison they're going to. I would say we have some of our experience was that the champion left and we were left bereft. Like that it then made things very difficult without that person there, because we were so reliant on that one person that if they're not there, it makes it very difficult. So I would, we absolutely have found that to be important, and I would sort of challenge people to then, maybe there's a way to sort of embed that within, so champions and systems sort of working in tandem. Andy brought up earlier the challenges of the dynamic purchasing system and sort of the clash between principle and what you might want to be able to say you're doing versus what you're allowed to do in practice. And that is also a research question. You know, that some of the challenge of this was trying to communicate to prisons or to organisations, not the arts organisations, but sort of others involved, that this is an embedded research project. The project delivery and the research are going hand in hand. And so actually, no, it's not an option for you to have the project without one of the research team there. We have to be there. That's the nature of what this is. And of course, that's not always what's happening in most of the work that you're doing. But when for any research project, sort of trying to say to the prison, we really want it to be participatory. We want to get the participants involved in what we're doing, and they love that on paper. The idea is great, and then you say what that's going to require resource-wise, or we say we'd love to have a comparison group, and they say, great, we need research that has a kind of quasi-experimental design, and then we say, so we're going to need an escort. And we can't resource that. And I think, so that is one of the challenges of conducting this kind of research in this kind of way. I think it's been wonderful to have solid relationships here that have meant things have been made easier, but it's certainly something we've sort of learned, or we probably already knew, but have continued to sort of factor into the experience.